2013 Scion FRS. We have a new manual trans that we're going to put in this car. In this video, I'll show you guys some insider tips and tricks to get this job done. Alright, first thing you guys want to do, find a service manual online and print out the manual trans section. Disconnect the negative battery terminal. Alright, I have a hood prop actually in the middle of the hood because working on this side, this OEM hood prop is actually going to be getting in your way, so this will just give you some more room. We don't want the car to keep going up and down so many times, so we're going to try to do as much as we can up top before we lift up the car. So that means the big B21 connector, this guy, ground strap, there should be a bracket here that we're going to unbolt. These two on the trans, clutch slave cylinder, and then possibly the top starter bolt and then the top bell housing bolt. So we'll get all those done before we lift up the car. Alright. There's a 1 pin on the starter. You want to squeeze that connector to pull it out towards the back of the car. And then there's a bottom bolt, 14mm for the starter. That's also a bell housing bolt. We'll take that guy out when we lift up the car. Alright, moving to the other side, 2 14s for the slave cylinder. We're just going to take that off and loop it on top of the heater hose lines, and then one more 14 bell housing bolt on top. And then while this is disconnected, don't press the clutch pedal because this guy will actually pop out. Those top two, it's a tight fit, so they kind of suck because you can't really get a ratchet on there, so stubby wrench is your friend for the top 2 bell housing bolts. Alright, so that's it for everything on the top of the car. We should not have to lower this back down to get to anything. So we're gonna lift this up and then start disassembling things from the bottom. Alright, underneath the car, so this tray's gotta come out. This portion of the exhaust is gonna come out. So 2 bolts right here for the cat, and then 2 bolts here, and only this guy will come out. We'll drain the trans and then undo the 4 drive shaft bolts. Alright, I got my 2 under trays off. We're getting ready to drain the transmission. We're going to allow this time to drain while we do all the other stuff. You actually don't need to drain the trans when you want to pull it out. Let's say for example the fluid service was done on this not too long ago and now we're just doing the clutch. Well, it'd be worth it just to plug up the trans and leave the fluid in it. But in this case, the customer wants new fluid in it, so we're gonna drain the trans. Alright, so we have the transmission we're gonna put in the car. There's a couple ways you can plug up the output shaft. They do make special tools that fit in there so that when you pull the trans, the gear oil isn't gonna spill out on you. This is actually an old drive shaft yoke from a Toyota W58 transmission. These trans came in a whole bunch of different Toyotas, like 90s trucks, Supras, Celicas, and I just cut this off of a drive shaft and now it's my yoke tool whenever I do transmissions, so the preventing gear oil from coming out of this guy. SXE Toyota Altezza also has the same yoke. On this transmission you have a fill and a drain plug. 10mm Allen sockets what you want. Every single one of these style, you always want to undo the fill plug first to make sure this guy is not stripped out, because what if you undid this and then find out this is stripped out later and then now you can't fill up your rear diff or transmission anymore. So 10mm Allen. There's 2 crush washers under here that are one-time use only. You want to make sure that you get those ahead of time. You never want to reuse these because what'll happen is you'll actually damage both the case and then also the threads that these drain plugs screw into. Alright, we got our transmission fluid draining. We're going to take this portion of the exhaust off. Before we take this off, there's some critical parts you want to spray some penetrating lube on. So these two bolts to the front pipe, these studs are common to snap off. This bolt for the center exhaust hanger, and then you want to soak these guys in penetrating oil. I've seen either this nut will get seized on there or this thing will straight just snap in half. So once you undo those 3 section of bolts, this exhaust hanger will hang this up so you don't have to worry about this guy falling down. So let's undo these and come back. Transmission's done draining, so I just got these plugged back up. I forgot to mention, you can't actually fit a ratchet and socket on here. So specifically for these two, I used a box end 6-point wrench, because not only do you not want these studs to break, but you don't want those nuts to strip out too, and these are held on by like a ton of force. So we're gonna take this guy off. Like I said, the center exhaust hanger will hang this guy up here, so you don't have to worry about this thing falling down on you. Alright. What I did there, but you can actually stick a screwdriver in there and then pry this back a little bit to get the exhaust up and over the hanger, and that'll help you out to remove it. So moving on to the drive shaft, we're going to take out 2 14s, 4 drive shaft bolts. Once this drive shaft comes down, I'm going to plug up the output with my sacrificial yoke to make sure that any residual fluid doesn't come spilling back on the floor or on us. Alright, so I forgot to mention the car should be in neutral and then parking brake off, because you want to be able to rotate the drive shaft to get access to all 4 bolts. These drive shaft bolts are a mother sucker to take off, because not only are these held on by 55 foot-pounds, but some really tough Loctite from the factory. So there's a place to put 2 wrenches. We're not going to do that because, like I said, it takes an extreme amount of force. What we're going to do, I have my lady's foot. You can also stick anything else in there between the U-joints just to hold the U-joints still. So I'm going to stick this in here. I'm going to go to the nut side with my box end wrench and then loosen it this way. Alright, so you guys can see that was a ton of force, but once this is broken loose, then I should be able to put 2 wrenches on here and be alright. One more thing you want to do before you take off this yoke: get out your paint pen and mark where the yoke goes in relation to the rear diff flange. Not very common on modern cars, but especially on older stuff, you can have issues where if these two aren't marked, if these two don't go back in the same position, you may have balance and vibration issues. So in my mind, it's like these two guys didn't have vibration for all these miles and all this time. Let's put it back in the same exact spot. Alright, so you got your 4 bolts off. Let's say this thing's stuck, you can't get it off. Don't be tempted to stick a screwdriver in here and try to hammer it off. You're absolutely going to damage the drive shaft and the yoke. So what you want to do, grab yourself a pry bar or a flathead screwdriver, and then between the U-joints, you should just want to do that, and then you probably saw right there that it popped off from. I purposely left 1 bolt in there so that when this guy broke loose, it didn't just fly off. We're gonna undo 2 14s for the center bearing, pull that out and plug it up and come back. If you guys have noticed, I actually have not been inside the interior of the car yet, and there's a certain reason why. So insider tip, thank you Neil from the Racers line in Concord, California, taught me this trick to remove the trans without having to disassemble any of the interior. So it looks like we're gonna leave this piece, this shifter piece inside the car. We're going to take both of these 2 out from each side and then take the shifter portion from the trans off of the shifter ball on the body. There is a clip and a washer on the driver's side that go on, so make sure you do not lose these 2 guys. I'll show you what these 2 look like on our spare trans. There's 1 of these on each side of the transmission. You want to take these two guys off and leave that brace or leave the transmission tripod up in the car. So how do you take these things off? I got my pick. I'll just put it under this guy, under the back, and then lift up. And there's a tang that retains this to the transmission, so this will lift off and then these just pull out. You may need to push the transmission down or move it side to side to get clearance to take this thing all the way out. But so we're at this point. There's 2 bolts, 2 nuts, plus the starter / ground wire bracket for the starter. So I'm gonna undo that long bolt, 14mm bolt, take the starter out from the bottom. Oh, there's that guy too. Take out the rest of the bell housing bolts, and then we should be ready to pull the trans out. All right, we're getting ready to drop the transmission. I have a pull jack with a piece of wood under the exhaust manifold, and we do this for 2 reasons. We want to be able to control the tilt of the engine, whether we need to tilt it back or tilt it back up. We also want to make sure that when we're pulling the transmission out, we don't want the engine to rock back and forth on us. What we're trying to prevent is the input shaft against the clutch disc doing this thing. And so there's a cool spot right here where I like to put a pry bar, so I can just push this back and just to get these 2 guys separated first. And then the key is, depending on if the customer has an aftermarket front sway bar or not, you may actually need to lift the trans up and over this sway bar. And but again, that depends if the customer's got a bigger front sway bar or not. Cool. Loose right there. We should be able to go by hand the rest of the way. All right, so I'm off both of the dowels right now, so just be careful. Okay. Make sure everything back there is out of the way. Alright, so that should be it for part 1, tips and tricks on removal. Make sure to stay tuned for part 2 on tips and tricks on how to install this guy back in there.